All right, and we are live, and we are back live and inside the lab. How's everybody doing this Saturday evening? Thank you for joining in this Saturday night live stream, taking part in my 10 live stream experiment to see what's a good time to just kick it and hang out with you guys, answer any questions you may have, and share any tips where I can, and give you some excuse me, and give you some of my best advice for starters for building a gaming PC. I want to jump over to the chat and say hey to a few familiar friends and faces, starting with Dr. Elo. It's good to see you, Ephraim, as always. Um, Self-publishing with Dale. Good to see you as well, Dale. Big shout out to Dale. Learn a lot of my live streaming tips and just working with Streamlabs, OBS, and Restream, but watching a lot of live streaming text video, which is one of Dale and his brother Walt channel. Shout out to AKA CK3. Hey, I think this is the first time we've seen you on the chat. It's good to see you though. Thanks for hanging out. But uh but yeah, Dale says I can't stay, Terrence. Just wanted to say what's up. Yeah, Dale. Thanks for checking in, man. Thanks for hanging out. Check the replay out. Love to know what you think, man. Thanks for hanging out though. It's good to see you. Uh, Dr. Elo says peace out, Dale. Made it right. Yeah. So yeah, and let's jump into the warm up. So in this YouTube live stream, I wanted to share some of my best tips and tricks and my best advice for building a gaming PC. If you watch some of the build videos we did, like the Threadripper Core Shredder series, you may have got a glimpse of how I build from say beginning to finish, like from picking out the parts to actually building the system and then to actually benchmarking the system. We broke that down into a three-part series, and if you're interested, after the live stream, you can jump down into the description box below and check out the series because you'd be surprised at the value that the first generation Threadripper offered even at that time, which was earlier in the year, I believe. But we we based that video off of the 12 core 24 thread 1920X that I was able to snag for a really good price. So that's all the spoilers you're going to get. But check it out down in the description box. It was a very interesting series, and I really enjoyed just planning, recording, and shooting that series. And if you hung around for some of the videos towards the very end, you may have noticed some like post-credit teasers that I would drop towards the end of the video just to give the audience a little bit of insight as to what's going to come next with that particular series. So let me jump back over to the chat because I see we got um, another member of the community joining in here. We got Z Fluent. He says I play Fortnite on a laptop. Is that a good start for gaming? But I have a monitor and keyboard mouse hooked up. I mean, if Z Fluent, if it gets the job done, then like if you're able to be competitive at Fortnite, if you play on a competitive level, I'd say it is a good start, especially if it has a dedicated graphics card. Tell us the specs down in the chat, more specifically like the CPU and I guess the brand. Let us know. But I mean, gaming on a laptop is very viable, and you still could hook it up to an external monitor, like you said, or in some cases, some people, if they're not playing competitively, they'll hook it up to like a TV. But yeah, you have a monitor and keyboard and mouse hooked up. I mean, that's a decent setup. That's a good starter setup, and definitely. The good thing about laptops is you can also, go mobile, right? You can pick up your machine and practically play anywhere. So that's one of the benefits you really get from gaming on a gaming PC. But excellent question. Keep them coming. Again, if you have any questions during the live stream, just drop them down in the chat box for either myself, or if you have a question about anything we discussed during the live stream, also drop it down in the chat box. And if you're watching on the replay, shout out to our friends on the replay. Our live streams typically are a little long-winded, but if you're watching on the replay and you have any questions anywhere during the segment of this live show, you can also drop them down in the comments. It's one of my favorite aspects of content creation, and that's talking to, you know, men and women all over the globe and just all different walks of life. So yeah, excellent question. Keep them coming. But I'm gonna jump right into it and talk about some of the first steps I recommend. Like if you're building from scratch and you're not going with, say, you're not going with somebody who builds the PC, say like iBuyPower or something to that extent. Like you're going to order your parts from an online retailer, say Amazon or Newegg, or if you're here in the States and you live by a Micro Center, it's what I highly recommend. Micro Center doesn't ship, but that's kind of the trade-off you get with their prices being competitively low. Like you can really get some solid deals from Micro Center. They're all really good guys. The one I go to here is in Calora, Maryland, and I love it. I always have a great experience going there, even if I'm not going there with the intent to buy parts. It's just awesome to come in there and check out some of the new hardware and just talk to some of the sales rep because they're just fun guys. They love they love PC gaming just as much as we do, and they live and breathe it as an income, as a way of life. Dr. Elo says you can always use the NVIDIA GeForce Now app to play. That is true. You can use the graphics card, and Dr. Elo is right. GeForce Now has come a very long way as an app. I use it to update my drivers, but you can stream, you can encode, you can capture gameplay, all those good things on using NVIDIA GeForce Now. But yeah, excellent advice, Dr. Elo. So it starts with researching your parts, right? Because this is going to determine the kind of system that that you need. If you're just gaming, not gaming, and you want to occasionally or casually stream at the same time, you also want to say do some graphic or photo manipulation, that's going to determine the type of CPU, your the type of graphics card or video card you may need, and most importantly, how much RAM you're going to need. So it's what my best advice, or the advice number one, tip number one, is you really sit down and you think about how you're going to use your system over the next year, right? PC parts get old fast, unfortunately, right? Like if you've been paying attention to the RTX 3080 launch and the whole debacle between us 2080 Ti owners, I mean, PC parts age fast. So you want to have a good understanding of how you want to use your system, say over the next year. If you're just gaming, you can settle for a slightly lower price point, or say put your money in other places, say your monitor, which is always a good start, or your video card, which is always a good start as well. Because if you're only gaming, you only need your CPU to do so much. And arguably, you still can get away with a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, especially if you're only gaming. Jumping over into the chat, uh, Dr. Ela says, I use my MacBook Pro on the go with it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't use Macs as much as I used to when I wrote video games, but um, they are viable machines nonetheless. And Z Fluent says my specs are Intel Core i5 3230M CPU, 2.6 gigahertz, 4 gigabytes of RAM, and he plays on GeForce. Okay. All right, so yeah, he does use it. Awesome. I mean, those are decent specs, especially for a starter machine, something you can actually play on the go. Those are really nice specs. So, um, but let's say, and let's play off of Zfluent's example. Let's say in this example, we're going to we're going to build a Fortnite gaming PC, which we already did with the best gaming PC Fortnite in 2020. Um, a little bit of insight. a little bit of studio insight. That video was the first video I sat down and said, you know what? I want to deliver an experience, a visual experience, a storytelling experience in this niche. So I planned that video out in a story heavy structure from the very beginning to the very end. And that video is one of the best performing videos on the channel. Last time I checked, we were pushing close to 7,000 views on it, and the video is only about 8 months old, so or less, maybe about 6 months old. So it's really was a turning point for the channel and the content going forward. So let's use that video as an example, and Zfluence spec sheet as an example, and say we're only going to build a PC that we want to run Fortnite, 1080p competitive settings. We've covered that here on the channel a lot. So if you're new, be sure to check the description box after the live event. We have a lot of videos that could help you get started on a lot of the that can help you or not get started. It can give you a better idea with a lot of the advice that we're sharing on this live stream. So use one good thing to do is to use PCPartPicker.com. We use PCPartPicker.com on our first live stream to build a, or I showed you how to configure, I believe the budget was a $600 gaming PC. And you want to use PC Part Picker because you're going to have tools available to you that's going to check for part compatibility. It's going to check for, it's going to measure your system wattage for you. It's going to alert you to any issues or potential issues you may have with your system, including if your case doesn't support. For example, if your case doesn't have USB 3.0 headers, but your motherboard does, PC Part Picker will let you know, and that's important. If you want USB 3.0 for your peripherals, then you're going to want a case that has USB 3.0 headers. And we'll get to that more a little later down in the live stream, so be sure to stick around. And on top of that, we're doing the mystery box unboxing. Some of you guys shared, yeah, we got a little bit of interesting feedback on say Instagram and Twitter about what's inside. I know what's inside. Um, I just wanted to see what did you, ladies and gentlemen, think was inside. So we're gonna unbox that at the end, and I'm gonna pull up some of the comments we got on Twitter and Instagram. And it's still not too late to drop your guess down in the comment or in the chat box. Drop your guess down in the chat box. Let me know what you think is inside the mystery box, especially if you haven't already guessed on, say, my Twitter or my Instagram. Which, if you're not following me on Twitter or Instagram, shameless plug, you can find me over there at Inside the Lab YT, both Instagram and Twitter. I'm super active on Twitter. It's always a quick way to mention if you have a question and you want to kind of reach me right in the moment. Follow me on Twitter. Love hanging out with you guys and girls over there. So, but yeah, going back to PC Part Picker and the system we're configuring, a gaming PC. My best advice to you would be start with the CPU, especially if you've already determined your resolution. Most competitive players play at 1920 by 1080p or 1080p, and even then, they usually drop the settings down to get the most possible FPS and also a good response time. So it's a good start to find the parts that can best suit your needs. And it's good to start with the CPU. Um, Pick a CPU that is going to be able to run the games you want to play. So it's good to check, for example, we're using Zfluence example, right? The Fortnite. Fortnite can run on a potato. You really don't need a beefy system to run Fortnite, but if you want to run it competitively, you may want a competent CPU and video card. But in this example, you want to go with a CPU that is as close to the recommended specs or specifications and the minimum specifications for the competitive game you want to play. Another super heavy competitive game, Rainbow Six Siege, which is a game I should really start including that back in our CPU benchmarks because it's just as big as Fortnite and that community is still growing strong. So I believe Rainbow Six Siege. If you play Rainbow Six Siege, let me know in the chat box if you play Rainbow Six Siege. But um, get a CPU that's going to be able to run the game that you want to play competitively. Start on PC Part Picker, choose your platform, choose your CPU, determine your RAM. If you're gaming, you really only need 16 gigabytes of RAM. But if you want to stream, which we'll get to that too a little bit down the road, but if you want to stream, then you may want to consider a CPU with at least 6 cores and 12 threads and at least 32 gigabytes of RAM. That way you have an experience that's not only playable and competitive, but also visually appealing to your audience that's watching. That's very important. The video card's also going to help push those frames out at the lower setting. So if you're at 1080p, you don't need a video card with a high amount of VRAM. You can get away with 4 gigabytes of VRAM, 6 gigabytes of VRAM. That's usually a good sweet spot for a game like Fortnite, especially if you're only playing at 1080p. So you, using PC Part Picker, you would just have a wide range of options that you can choose from. Okay, so and that way, and while you're waiting for your parts, say you've already picked them out, you know what you want to get, your CPU, your GPU, your RAM, you've already picked out your parts. While you're waiting for your parts, what I'd recommend you do, especially if you already had them picked out, so you've already determined your CPU, let's say in this case it's a Ryzen 5 1600X. I've done so much content on that CPU. It's a great CPU. It really is. But let's say in this case it's a Ryzen 5 1600X, 6 core 12 thread, minimum base frequency 3.6 gigahertz, turbo of up to 3.9, which that CPU can hit 4 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes 4 gigahertz on a decent B450 motherboard. But you want to research each one of your parts. Research your motherboard, research your CPU, research your RAM. If it takes 5 to 10 days in shipping, if you're waiting for it to ship in the mail, or if you're even driving to Micro Center, still take the time, familiarize yourself with those parts. Read up on any potential problems you may run on. Say if you're using a Gigabyte Aorus B450 motherboard, maybe those motherboards suffers from uh, incorrect SATA reads or something to that extent, or it's known for having random restarts and black screens. I mean, do your research. Be prepared for anything with your parts. Familiarize yourself with your parts as much as possible. So, yeah, that's one of I mean I can't stress that enough. It's something even I do. I like to read so much. If I'm ordering a part or if I'm considering buying a part, I will educate myself as much as possible on it just to see, um, just to see if I may run into any problems or if I may need any extra tools or if I may run into any incompatibility problems. So jumping over to the chat and we see Dr. Elo says, yeah, so good. I mean, if you're just joining into, tell me where you're watching from. What's it like? What's the weather over there? Yeah. So, but while you're waiting for getting your parts, or while you're waiting for your parts, and you want to get all your tools. If you don't have tools to build, it's good to get them now. You need the tools to get the job done. At least, especially if you want to get the job done correctly. You need the right tools. And what I recommend is a Phillips screwdriver. You'd be surprised at how much you can get done with just your Phillips screwdriver. But I recommend a Phillips screwdriver, right? Magnetic tip if you can, because if you're like me, and I don't always catch them on camera. I mention them on the live streams, but I don't always catch them on camera. But if you like me, I drop the screws a lot in my cases, and all my Phillip heads, all my screwdrivers are um, all magnetic tips. Like the whole bit set is all magnetic, and it comes in really handy when dropping screws in like really tight places. So a magnetic tip is really helpful for dropping screws inside the case, or say like underneath the motherboard. And there's like a half an inch gap in between the motherboard. Um, Sorry, Steve Fluent says, is it possible to build a PC for $200 to $300? Brand new? you may need to up that a little bit. You're kind of in between that 249 to 329. On here on the channel, Z Fluent, I did a video on how to build a budget Ryzen PC. It was with a Ryzen 3 2200G. That system total cost was about $249. It didn't have a dedicated video card, but it had 16 gigabytes of RAM, I believe, and an SSD, a B450 motherboard, standard ATX case, and it was a little over the $300, in between $249 to $300, and it would um, definitely play Fortnite, say at 1080p low settings or 720p with a mixture of high settings on that dedicated Vega 8 APU. So I got David. Oh, David Guest in the chat. He said, "What's up, bro? What's going on, Dave? It's good to see you, man, or good to see you here on the chat." David is a long time friend of mine I grew up with over in Canby Park. It's good to see him. We used to play a little basketball. For those of you who don't know, yeah, I played a little basketball when I was young. I wasn't that good at it, but I liked playing it. I didn't get good until I got older. But yeah, it's good to see you, Dave. Thanks for stepping in and hanging out. Excuse me. Another tool you're going to want is an extended Phillips head. Sorry, jumping back into the tools you need to build a gaming PC. Right. In the beginning, we talked about finding the right parts. Once you already picked out your parts and you already ordered them from an online retailer, you want to familiarize yourself with those parts. So study the CPU, study the GPU, study the power supply unit, familiarize yourself with any potential problems the power supply may run into, familiarize yourself with the case, all your parts. If you don't have them physically on hand, study and research those parts before they come in the mail. And while you're waiting to do that, you want to either get your tools ready or go out, right, in your budget. Hopefully you've allocated enough money to get your tools, because you're going to need them nonetheless. Borrow them from an uncle, a relative, a parent, but you're going to need the right tools to build your PC, and you're going to want it done correctly. So having a extended Phillips head is really helpful as a tip. Another tip I recommend, because when you're installing your CPU fans or an AIO, for example, it can be hard sometimes to reach the mounting screws that fastens the AIO bracket or the fan bracket to the CPU IHS, and you want to get the right amount of torque and a balanced right amount of torque in all four of those screws, right? That way you have the right amount of contact is being made between the CPU IHS, the thermal paste, and the underside of the AIO cooler or the AIO pump. So having a extended Phillips head can really help you get down on your case and really get a firm grip on the screws, get decent 180-degree firm and steady, slow and steady, firm 180-degree turns. Having an extended Phillip head is going to help you, say, not strip your screws, or not mess up the thread on the socket on the motherboard. So again, having the right tools makes all the difference. Zfluent says, "What is your most recommended Windows Core or Ryzen? Oh, what's your most recommended CPU core for Ryzen? If I'm reading your question correctly, Zfluent. Um, I mean, with your core counts, if we're talking core counts, again, it depends on what you're doing. But for a good starting point for Ryzen, I would say 6 core, 12 threads, so 1600X, 1600, 2600, 2600X, 3600, 3600X. 3600 has an insane value for, I believe at Micro Center it was on sale for $169. It's amazing. And then with Intel could be a little bit more tricky, because Intel still very much makes the fastest gaming CPU. Like, they still have that crown. It's just that, and I preach this on the channel, although I don't really cover a lot of Intel CPUs unless they're like Xeons or some of the older architectures. But with Intel, you're going to pay that premium to have that moniker, to having that the fastest gaming CPU, because it's still at 1080p, especially it's still about single core performance. It's still very much about single core performance, and that's something Intel even now, excuse me, even now on 10th gen, that's something Intel still reigns supreme on. That single core performance, and this is why they're still able to have an edge over AMD. But it's also just not about clock speed and cores. It's mostly about instructions per cycle or instructions per clock, aka IPC, and that's something AMD is definitely catching up on. Which, if you're not subscribed to the channel, highly recommend you get subscribed, because we're going to cover the launch of Ryzen 4000, which is on October 8th, and also the launch of RDNA 2, which is on October 28th. So we're likely going to do a live stream that weekend of the announcement to talk about it. So be on the lookout for those. Get subscribed with the notification bell on, so you can catch the notification when we schedule that YouTube live. But I mean, that's a good question, Z Fluent. I hope I answered. If not, please keep the questions coming. It's a good one. I mean, it's always like who says, do I need cores? How many cores do I need? Again, it really depends on what you want to do. What I recommend, if you're playing Fortnite and you may want to find yourself creating content 6 months, 7 months after you build your system, prepare for that. Like, invest in your experience if you can. If you can't at the moment, Ryzen especially gives you a great upgrade cycle on their AM4 platform. Like, it really does. You can start with a B450 and $100 CPU and slowly work your way up and upgrade to a 3800X, which is an 8-core 16-thread CPU. Fantastic CPU for gaming, video encoding, and things like that. Although it depends on what you use to as your software, because Adobe can use the iGPU on Intel to kind of accelerate the encoding process and just scrubbing in the timeline in general. But the 3800X has insane value for the price, and I believe those two were going on Micro Center for under, like, I believe it was under $249. It was insane value. So on Intel, again, though, you're going to pay that premium. A 9900K still very much is a $400 CPU, and a Z390 motherboard anywhere between $150 to $200. So it really depends on if that's really what you want. If you really want to strive for the fastest possible gaming CPU, then you go with Intel. And Intel, you can go with, say, a 6-core 12-thread CPU, which the 10th generation product stacks all do have hyperthreading now. So that's something to consider. So once again, Zfluent, I hope that answered your question. If not, keep them coming. But obviously, another important tool you're going to need is a monitor, keyboard, and mouse, right? Because one, you need to, after you build, you're going to want to make sure you can get video out. That's very important to the whole entire process. You want to make sure you can get video out. When you get video out, that's like you can breathe a sigh of relief. Seriously, you breathe a sigh of relief the moment you hit power and the bloody thing comes on. Sure, like you're like, okay, whew, is it going to show video? But then once you see that manufacturer logo flash on the screen, and it jumps into the BIOS, or you get the install Windows screen, or if your storage is brand new, whatever the case may be, you breathe a sigh of relief when you hit power and you see those lights come on, and you're doing something right. So you're going to need a monitor to check for video out. Make sure you have a keyboard. Any USB 3.0, 2.0 keyboard and mouse would do. And that's so you can make sure you can install Windows. Very important. Make sure your USB headers are working correctly and they're not malfunction or acting erratically. You want to, and also make any changes in the BIOS with your keyboard. So I know it seems redundant, something I shouldn't have to recommend, but you'd be surprised. You definitely want to make sure you have those things front and center, present before. Highly recommend before you even get started. Dr. Ela says, I am Ryzen all the way. Same thing. I mean, Ryzen, AMD has done something really special with Ryzen, and it's one of the reasons why I'm sitting and waiting to make the big upgrade myself to Zen 3 or Ryzen 4000 because it's going to offer insane value, and I think the IPC gains are going to be incredible. Ryzen just has great price to performance, and it's really good for content creators who want to get their, foot in the door, and they want to create something that is going to be able to get the job done. So that's gaming, editing, gaming, and streaming, and then editing their videos for uploading for to YouTube. Say if you have a YouTube channel, but you also stream to Twitch and you want to say use something like DaVinci Resolve, which is a free video editing program, and we used it in the Threadripper. We tested the 1920X with DaVinci Resolve, encoding a 1080p video and a 4K video, and the software handled that CPU really well. And you can still pick up a 1920X on eBay for a really good price because you have second gen is already out, so you have your 2920X, and AMD is surely going to unveil the next generation of Threadripper between now and 2021. Dr. Ela says, I do want to see what Apple does with their new ARM chips. Yeah, I think Apple is on the cusp of likely manifesting their gaming device or their gaming machine for the household. That was something Apple was rumored to do for a while now, and I really think they waited until now so they can get a chip that can compete, say, with what the consoles are using, especially in the upcoming consoles, say the PS5 and Xbox Series X. Those are going to be insane value for what Microsoft and Sony is touting that you're going to get at 4K and 1080p. Dr. Elo says, although for gaming, Apple is not even competitive. No, they're really not. They're just really not. I don't recommend gaming on a Mac. They're for what you have to pay to do it, it's just not there. You could build a really decent gaming PC for what you would have to, pay up for a Mac, a MacBook Pro or an iMac with hardware that can game at a respectable refresh rate and just not. I mean, and most games are very much compatible with Windows, so I mean that's something to consider. Apple though makes great looking products, so and I know a lot of photographers. It was something that I know they swear by Apple products for that, and I mean that's mad respect to them. At the end of the day, you have to use what works for you, right? You have to use the best tools to get the job done, especially if you're creating content. So, yeah, you're going to want your monitor, keyboard, mouse, Phillips head screwdriver, magnetic if you can. So the tips are magnetic again. If your screws drop down in the case, you just kind of drop it down and pick it right on up. Extended Phillips head, so it's like a 12-inch Phillips or even flathead, because mounting the CPU fan cooler or AIO pump can be a little tight, so you can get better leverage with an extended Phillips head. So I can't recommend that enough. And also on top of that, a hex key or a hex screwdriver or Allen key to tighten the motherboard standoffs. In my experience, especially with brand new cases, the motherboard standoffs, if they come pre-installed, so if they already come screwed onto the motherboard tray, they're almost never screwed down all the way. When I built Snow White, I ran into this problem when I built Snow White, and this system is in the RX 570, the Crystal Series case, and the motherboard came with the standoffs pre-installed, and it was causing it to short. So once I tested everything and built it in the case, I hit power, it immediately shut off. And I took the motherboard out and inspected the standoffs and saw they weren't. One of them was like really loose, so I had to get an Allen key or a hex key and just tighten them down. It was super easy, but if you don't have one, they're often difficult to turn using your hand because you just can't get enough torque to drive the standoff into the motherboard. Dr. Ela says, I do use a custom made PC at home and for streaming, best performance and value. Yeah, I remember you shared your specs with us on live stream number 1. This is actually live stream number 4, in our first 10-part live stream experiment. But yeah, I remember you shared your specs with us before, and it is the best performance for value, and Ryzen's right on top of that. So yeah, get your tools together while you're waiting for your parts in the mail, if you don't already have them. If you're even, say, you bought them tonight and you're going to pick them up at Micro Center tomorrow, spend the majority of your night familiarizing yourself with the build process. Watch some videos right here on Inside the Lab to help you familiarize yourself to get comfortable with, enabling your XMP, overclocking your GPU if that's something you're interested in. We haven't done any CPU overclocking yet. I wanted to with the Ryzen 5 1600X, but I am so late to that party. It's no secret that CPU is really only going to hit 4 gigahertz top speed. That's all it's going to get. So there's really not that much instructions per se to give you to overclock Ryzen. Um, most first generation Ryzen can hit 4 gigahertz though, and you do get a performance boost. I recommend it if it's something you're comfortable with, is to overclock your CPU. So, but yeah, so moving right along to your a tool that's often underrated, and that's having a USB. You need a USB, most importantly, to install Windows. If you're installing Windows fresh for the first time and you didn't get a key with the what if you buy the high price Windows key from Microsoft, you get a little thumb drive you can use, and you can use more than once to install Windows even if you don't have a key. um, but yeah, you're going to want to use a USB at least 8 gigabytes to install Windows. You're also going to want another USB to perform a BIOS update, just in case you need to. If the motherboard is if you bought the motherboard used, or if you bought it from Micro Center, if you bought it offline and the manufacturer didn't already, if the manufacturer didn't already update the microcode, you may have to do it yourself. Chances are they already did, as most B450 motherboards and what have you are coming with the microcode to run Zen 2 CPUs, excuse me, or Zen 3 CPU or Zen 2 CPUs. And if you have a much older, a much older AM4 motherboard, it's likely already ready to run at least indefinitely a Zen Plus CPU. So you would have choices, but you're going to want to update your motherboard. This is going to help you get better memory XMPs, better overclocks. It'll just help with overall system stability. Z Fluent, it's a good question. He says, "Is Micro Center open?" And Dr. Elo says, "Yes, he was there yesterday." Yeah, the Micro Centers out here have been open for the majority of the pandemic. Especially the one out here that I go to. You have to wear a mask, and there's social distancing. It's just most of the protocols you hear basically around the world is what Micro Center implemented into their store. But I mean, it's super comfortable when I went. So yeah, they are. It depends on where you live too. It depends on where you live. Z Fluent, tell us where you're watching from. I know Dr. Elo is down over in VA. So yeah, tell us where you're watching from, and if you just joined us on the chat, tell us where you're watching from as well. Tell us if it's day and night. What's the weather like? I'm here in Maryland by the Delaware line, and it's nighttime here. We had a little bit of rain, which I love the rain. It stopped, so that upset me a little bit. But yeah. So um, when with the and now again, I'm sorry if you didn't get a Microsoft key from Microsoft with the USB. You can buy any standard USB drive. Go to Walmart, Staples, anywhere. You can download the Microsoft Windows installation tool right from Microsoft. You download it onto the USB, and you can reuse that USB over and over and over again to install Windows. Or if your system is compromised, or say your hard drive fails and you need to reinstall Windows, write down your key. What I recommend is, get a sticky note and a piece of tape, write down your Windows key, take the tape, stick it on the inside of your panel of your, not on your door, in case you lose the panel door, right? You want to tape it, say, underneath the chassis or somewhere where you can't see on the case. But in the event you need to reinstall Windows, you have your key. However you went about going, you can get a Windows 10 key from any key site, say SCD keys or CD keys, or even eBay is where I get them from. You can get a decent key, and they are 100% legit. Dr. Elo says, "Yeah, I'm cruising. I'm cruising your area today, Terrence. Columbia, Maryland. Yeah. Oh man, you are deadly close, Ephraim. Wow. Next time, let me know. We might try to work something out. Masks or not, social distance or not, man. But yeah, you are. Columbia is not that far where I'm from. And Just Sampson just jumped in. He said, "What's up, Dr. Elo? Yeah. Hey, Just Sampson, it's good to see you. I know I talked to you over on Andrew's Consult the Blind Guy live streams. Much thanks for joining in and joining us on this Saturday night, Just Samson. Tell us how your weekend's going. Tell us where you're watching from. What's the weather? We're talking building. We're talking gaming PCs and some of my best advice for building them. We've already talked about step one, which is researching your parts before you buy. That's very important. Research your parts before you buy. Know what your needs are. Know your CPU. Your CPU architecture type, that's core configuration, platform, how much RAM you're going to need, if you're going to need a video card, if you plan on gaming and playing, say, a competitive game like Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, while you're waiting for your parts, familiarize yourself with every component before they get to you, before they're standing right there and you have them in front of you. Research your parts. After you research your parts, get your tools together. Basically, you only really need a Phillips screwdriver. I in most of the builds I've done, I've really only needed my Phillips screwdriver, right? And we also talked about using a 12-inch Phillips extension or a 12-inch extended Phillips screwdriver set. That's to get good torque on your fans and your AIO. And we're moving right into now the process after the fact. So you've gotten after you've gotten your parts in the mail and you've gotten everything you need, your monitor is also important. Your monitor, your keyboard, your mouse, you're all set up, you're all good to go. You're ready to install Windows once your parts get there. They get there in the mail and you're just super pumped, you're super excited to get going and get your gaming system up and running. It's one of the great. When I get my parts, I sometimes just stare at them. I don't know. I don't build immediately when the parts come in the mail, unless it's for a client because I do build locally for clients. Unless it's for a client and there's a deadline, obviously I'll get it out. But if it's for the household or it's for the lab in the studio, I just kind of look at the parts and just in awe, and it's awe inspiring, right? What these systems can do once you put them together from scratch, and you feel real accomplished once you get there. Dr. Elo says, "Yeah, we can grab a beer next time." Yeah, sure. Took the family for dinner at Bubba, 33 Glen Burnie. Yeah, Glen Burnie is probably what 30 minutes, 30 minutes from me, 30 35 minutes from where I live. So yeah, definitely, man, definitely. And thanks for following me on Twitter. Again, if you're not following me on Twitter, you can find me there at Inside the Lab YT. It's a shameless plug once again, but I'm always active on Twitter. And if you're watching on the replay and you have a question, you can either ask me down in the comment section on the VOD, or you can mention me on Twitter. And I'm always and active and engaging over there. So yeah, definitely. Bet. All right. So yeah, once you have all your parts, they're right there in the building, and you're ready for the build process. Now, this can be intimidating. Yes, depending on how much you familiarize yourself with your parts, this can be extremely intimidating. It was for me the very first time, but before I started creating content and I was an independent game developer, I always was used to just using my hands. So working with tiny and delicate parts was comfortable to me. I enjoy it, and you always saw, oh, it's like working with Legos, and that's essentially true. And it's highly addictive. Once you build, it's like you want to do it again. Like you want to build Again, that's how it is for me. Just Sampson says the weekend is going well, my friends. I'm here in miserable Southern California. It's sunny, clear with a high of 75. Really hope the weather changes soon. Those are good numbers, and you guys are. It's a little earlier over there, so yeah, you guys still got sunshine, but that's awesome. I mean, California, from what I've heard, is a beautiful state. I've never been there, but we do know mutual friend, or we have friends who've relocated to California, but high of 75. Yeah, I mean that's here. It's getting a little cold here in Maryland. It's getting a little cold. We're getting our winter weather. We're coming up on that. But back to the build process. Once you have all your parts on the table, what I recommend is getting a large working space, like a large area that you can build, you can turn, you can spin, you can have your monitor, keyboard, and mouse, and also on top of that, the system that you're actually building, space for your parts, your graphics card, your screws that you can just lay out and you can just work and move and not be restricted by space, or you put something down on the floor. I highly recommend you don't put things down on the floor when you're building. Get a table or a large working space if you can. Take a piece of cardboard. It's always good to work underneath cardboard. It's one of the reasons why you see me using the X570 AM Ryzen motherboard, the Gigabyte Aorus Ryzen motherboard, as a test bed. It's just good to work under cardboard. It's non-conductive. You're 100% safe. You won't scratch any parts or anything like that. Um, yeah, I recommend you get a large piece of cardboard, work underneath of that, get everything laid out, right? If you're building with a case that's new, you're going to want to break down the case in its entirety, and we're going to get to that in a second. But I this is something I recommend, and it's not recommended by all tech creators on YouTube, especially the big ones. Only a select few of them do it. But what I recommend is you actually test the system before you build it in the case, right? Like I highly recommend you put together, install the CPU, install the RAM on the motherboard, and especially outside of the case. It's what I've done in nearly every system I built, with the exception, ironically, with Snow White. Like the CPU I had brought secondhand, but the motherboard was practically brand new at the time. The RTX 2080 I had bought for it at the time was brand. I mean, they were all brand new parts. I was confident in the build, so I didn't test it before building the case. I just went ahead and threw the parts in there and built the system. But when you're building for the first time and you want to make sure that there are no problems with any of the parts before you put them in the case, you want to take the motherboard box, like you see me doing. Take your motherboard box, right? Install your CPUs. Drop your CPU down inside of there. For the sake of simplicity, let's say you're using an air cooler or a fan cooler. Install your CPU fan. Almost all Ryzen CPUs come with a CPU cooler. Install your CPU fan, install your RAM, make sure you're putting them in the right DIMM slots. Normally DIMM slots go A1, B1, A2, B2. You want to say go A1, A2, or B1, B2. Check your motherboard's manual to see what's the best optimized configuration for your memory. And it's something also that I preached also on last week's live stream and in the DDR4 XMP video we did, which you can find that down in the description box. That video is taken off, really popular, but it's something I've recommended since I started working with Ryzen motherboards, and that's check your motherboard's QVL to make sure you're getting the best possible RAM for your motherboard, or the best optimized RAM for your motherboard. But you're going to want to install all your parts there. Install your SSD, right? Take your SATA cable, install into the SATA port, install into the SSD or the hard drive. If you're using an M.2 or NVMe M.2, it's non-volatile memory. You're going to want to go ahead and install that in the motherboard. Those are fairly simple and don't require any cords too. I mean, I am a big fan of M.2s. Snow White has three of them, so um, big fan of it. Dr. Elo says he loves open box. Yeah, so am I. I am a my one of my inspirations here on the platform, Brian at Tech Yes City. Shout out to Brian at Tech Yes City. We call ourselves used PC tech enthusiasts, and I love it. I'm definitely advocate of open box, even better, Dr. Elo, to put it that way. Yeah, open box is where it's at. You can save some money and get some amazing value with open box stuff. And I'm not sure. I think you weren't present when we talked about shopping for used parts on live stream number three, I believe that was, or two, but we talked about that shopping for used parts and some things you can look out for when you're shopping for used parts, and some of the value you can get when people are just wanting to upgrade. Like, man, if I really hope those of you with 2080 Ti's did not sell your 2080 Ti. If you did sell it, somebody was able to pick one up for $500-$600. They got an amazing deal for that graphics card. Still a lot of value there with this large VRAM buffer and CUDA core, and it's just and you also still get ray tracing if that's something you're interested in. But going back to getting your system all laid out on your table or on your test setup or what I call the test box, um, take your power supply, plug in your 24 power pin connector that's almost always on the right. You can install these very firm, just gentle, just wait for the click. General rule of thumb: if you gotta force it, it ain't right, chief. Don't do it. Normally, it should just be an effortless action that just feels natural, like putting a Lego, fastening a Lego together. If the Lego is just like not attached, you get frustrated, right? Like it's just not working. You don't want to do that with your parts, especially when you're connecting anything that's going to draw power. But install your 24 power pin connector. That's something we're going to take out after we test, though. Install your EPS, your CPU power connector. This is almost 4, 6, 8 pins, depending on the CPU, the chipset. But you're going to want to plug in the 24 power pin connector, 8 pin power pin connector, SSD. Let's say, again, for the sake of simplicity, let's say we're using an SSD, right? Because Z-Fluent, hope he's still here on the chat. Z-Fluent, we use his example for Fortnite. So 500 gigabyte SSD, more than enough if you're only really playing competitive games. Although Fortnite is getting really, really big in the file download size, and Call of Duty Warzone as well, like over 100 gigabytes on PC. That's a lot. But 500 gigabytes should be a really good start. But install your SSD, install your video card. If it requires power, or if it's, say, something like an RX 570 or RX 560, a 1050 Ti, something, a GPU that doesn't require power, you just install it into the PCIe lane. That's all you got to do. But if it's a slightly higher end graphics card, you may find yourself needing to plug in a 6-pin PCIe connector or an 8-pin, excuse me, PCIe connector. And going all the way back to the beginning of the live stream, if you use PC Part Picker would have alerted you if you picked a power supply that did not have the right power connectors for your graphics card. That's important too. PC Part Picker is a tremendous tool. Even if you're not ready to buy, say, within the next month or two, I would still recommend you jump over to PCPartPicker.com and mess around with it. You can start a. Let me see if we can jump. Let's see if we could jump into it. What am I talking about? Let's see. You can you can start configuring your PC right from scratch. If you know how much you want to spend, you can start configuring your system. You can read about all the parts before you even make your final decision. If you know you have $600, I mean, I don't know why I always go for $600. It's a decent starting point. It's a decent starting point. But I don't know why I always go for $600. But if you're going with a $600 build, start picking your parts out now. PC Part Picker, again, super helpful with telling you a lot about the product, how much the rated memory speed. One of the members here in the community in our audience had a question about what's the maximum memory speed they can run on their motherboard. PC Part Picker right here will tell you, and to shop for memory speed somewhere in between this range here, because memory speed does matter, especially on Ryzen. That's something we talked about on that again on the DDR4 video. You can find that down in the basement. The basement, if you're new to the live streams, that's our description box, but you can find it down in the basement. It's down there. Highly recommend you check that video out after this live event. Super helpful, especially if you're running Ryzen or if you're considering running Ryzen. Again, it'll tell you how many USB headers. Okay, to USB 2.0. So it'd be important to pick a case out that has support for USB 2.0. Most of them will, but and definitely USB 3.2. So I mean, you can just start go to PC Part Picker. Start picking out your system now. Start putting together your list. Start with your motherboard. Go up to your CPU. Right? It's a it's an amazing tool. And again, it'll start calculating your wattage right here as you add your parts. And the warning label we got, I want to say it's because they're going to tell us that the motherboard may need a BIOS update. Yeah, as you can see right here. Hopefully you can see that. Some AMD motherboards may need a BIOS update prior to using my TCPUs. That's Zen Zen 2, Zen 2 CPUs. So if we went with say if I change this to an X570 motherboard, that warning will go away because most X570s, I mean they are made for Zen 2 Mati CPUs. And see, we won't get that warning now. No issues or incompatibilities found. Tells you your estimated wattage once you add your video. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on PC Part Picker. We did a whole live stream. Excuse me. We did a whole live stream on it. But I just want to show you this real quick because if you're watching on a replay or you're watching now and you're indecisive about how much you want to spend or not sure what to go with and you just want to get your feet wet, start at PCPartPicker.com. It's right here. You can build, save your list. You can even share it with, say, if you want to get a second opinion, you want to ask somebody in a community, or you want to send, mention me on Twitter. Say, hey, Lab, I put together this system. Tell me what you think. I want to play Fortnite competitive settings, 1080p, 144 hertz, 120 hertz. What do you think? You can share the link. Simple. Share the link. But if you add your video card, just want to show you this really fast. If you add your video card, obviously there won't be any RTX 3080s being added. If you've been following that debacle, and I also covered a vlog like video that's down in the description box as well. I want you to check that out because it's a slightly different format, and I normally don't do vlogs, but I wanted to do it in a news-like format where I can just kind of share my opinion on the RTX 3000 series launch. So if you're interested with that, you can find that down in the basement as well. But let's add a RTX. I believe it was a 2070. Yes, a 2070. And you'll see here our wattage went up by 100 and something watts, and now we're up to 350. So we know this gives us a good idea when we're shopping for our power supply unit. Okay, but I just wanted to show you that really fast. PCPartPicker.com. Familiarize yourself with it. Super helpful tool. Super helpful tool. Now you can since you won't be working in a case when you have all your parts laid out, you can you can test the motherboard and actually get it to power on if it doesn't come with a dedicated power on button. Most high-end motherboards will, although the X58, the Intel the first generation DX3SHO I have, LGA 1366 socket, that actually has a small power on button. I don't need to jump it. But if your motherboard doesn't and you need to test the parts, you can jump the motherboard or turn on the motherboard by bridging the positive and negative gaps or negative pins with any metallic object. I've used a fork, I've used a butter knife, I've used my screwdriver, anything to just be able to just make contact with both the pins and it'll just come on. It's like it's kind of cool. It's like magic, but it's really not magic if you just understand how electricity could how the process of motherboard or computer parts powering on and how they distribute power. But it's cool nonetheless. You can do this to get the motherboard to turn on not inside of the case. So you don't need to plug in your, your power on and your reset switch input headers. Not yet, at least, but we will get there. But this is good to do because you want to make sure your CPU fan is getting the job done, and definitely at least at idle. Like you would want to see really good idle speeds from your, I'm not sorry, not speeds, idle temperatures from your CPU cooler. You want to make sure that your storage is showing, your storage device is showing, so you can jump over and make sure that, say in our case, it's an SSD. So you want to see your SSD showing. You want to make sure it's the primary boot drive because that's where you're going to install Windows. Or if you have more than one storage device, say you have a 500 gigabyte SSD and a 1 terabyte hard drive, it's very important if the motherboard hasn't already made the determination of what's going to be the boot drive. You should go ahead in your BIOS and go ahead and assign that. It also depends on how you configure your SATA. So you SATA 1 for your boot drive, SATA 2. But it's most importantly, it's always good to check your motherboard's manual. If you don't have one physically, if you don't have a physical manual, you could almost certainly find it on Google. There hasn't been a motherboard manual. I would knock on some wood if I would knock on some wood, but there hasn't been a motherboard manual that I haven't been able to find online to either help myself troubleshoot a problem in, say, an older system I'm working with, or if I'm helping a client with their system if they have an older platform. But it's good to do this. It's good to check to make sure everything is reading right, to make sure everything shows, make sure your CPU isn't fluctuating and you're just getting like erratic speeds. The clock speed is jumping. You just want to make sure everything is cool as a fan, showing, it's reading right, nothing is making any noise. Your system is showing the proper or the right amount of RAM. It's showing 16. In our case, for this system we were using, it shows 16 gigabytes of RAM. That's very important. Once you do that, if everything looks solid, if everything looks good, and you're confident, you can install Windows at that moment and get it out the way, like install Windows, update your BIOS. You can do that all there if you don't want to, or it really depends on if I'm limited by time. If I have time, if it's for a video, I may just go ahead and do it while it's on a test setup. Just install Windows, update the BIOS if need be. But this is really up to you. It all depends on you as a builder and what you're comfortable with doing. You could wait until you just go ahead and get everything in the system because at that point, we know everything is working. We know our CPU is properly mounted because installing a Ryzen CPU is really tricky because the pins underneath are really, really delicate. Okay, and you don't want to bend them. Once they're bent, I mean, it takes some amazing skills to bend them back in place. It's doable, but if you got like more than one pin bent, it's almost it's almost not worth it. You're gonna put a lot of time in trying to get the CPU right. So when you're installing a CPU, it's just good to take your time. When you're installing your cooler, don't on Ryzen anyway, on AMD side, you don't want to move the cooler a great deal. With Intel, you really don't have this concern or problem because Intel CPUs, they have retention brackets that gives you the nice crunching sound. It's rather satisfying. When I first read into it, people say, "Oh, don't wig out. You're going to freak out. It's going to sound like a crunching sound. You're going to think you're damaging something. You're ruining your CPU." It's not true. When I'm put down every Intel CPU I installed, it's just satisfying just knowing the CPU is, it's going in its home. It's where it's supposed to be. It is fulfilling. It's destiny. But once everything looks good, your RAM showing your mount, you can go ahead and start busting your system down. Right? Let's say you want to install Windows, update your BIOS once everything is in the case, but you can wait to do it because everything looks good. This is something I do. Like I check to make sure everything is working right before I install it in a case. This will save me a lot of headaches if I do it that way. And this could save you too a lot of headaches if you do it this way, especially if you're buying open box, like my man Dr. Elo said, especially if you're buying open box. Like if you're buying open box, you want to make sure all your stuff is everything's running the way it's supposed to be. You want to make sure your graphics card is giving video out, because if it's not, that can be a huge problem. That could be a huge a difficult issue to troubleshoot, especially if you don't have any other graphics cards, right? So, yeah, once everything is showing right and you've applied, another tip I want to give and that's applying thermal paste. Here's the thing with applying thermal paste. There's different methods, different different approaches you can do to it. My best advice for you to be is to draw an X, like a lowercase x, dead in the center. Well, you don't need a lot of thermal paste. Just rule of thumb, you don't need a lot of thermal paste, because when the tighter the cooler, the fan for this case, the tighter you fasten the CPU cooler, the paste is going to spread out. So you don't need a lot. And if you do get some that runs over, it's okay. Most thermal paste is non-conductive. If you're unsure, it's always good to double check. And if you're using the AIO, or if your fan cooler comes with thermal paste from the manufacturer, do us all a favor. Go ahead and wipe it off. Okay, rubbing alcohol, 93% Isperol is what I use. Okay, 93% Isperol is what I use. It removes thermal paste. Really simple, fairly easy. Just a wipe and you're good to go. I'd remove the thermal paste that comes from the manufacturer and just use like Arctic's MX4 or thermal paste from Corsair, NZXT. Any brand manufacturer would really work, but there's been other tech creators here on YouTube that has done extensive videos on thermal paste. But for general base use, especially if you're not overclocking, you can get away with Arctic MX4. You can buy it right on Amazon. Newegg, Micro Center has a wide variety of thermal paste you can pick from. Um, Other methods, you can put some on, spread it with your finger if you're unsure. But really, if it spoils over, it's fine. Just get yourself a non-powderous like paper towel and just wipe it up with your Isperol. You'd be good to go. Okay. Once again, if you're joining in, tell us where you are watching from, and tell us what's going on in your neck of the woods. That's the old school saying right there. But uh, but yeah, we're still in the build process. Once you already confirm that everything is working, go ahead and take apart everything. But you're pretty much unplugging every power connector from your power supply, because you're going to want to mount that just as it is in the case. And when you're building, that's typically the last component I install. It also depends on the case that I'm working with, and if the power supply is modular or non-modular. So the non-modular power supply means you can't remove any unneeded or any power pins or any power cords that aren't being used. So, and then a fully modular, or you have semi-modular and fully modular power supplies. Semi is just like a hybrid, and fully is just what the name indicates, is you have full control over the cords you need. So that means less clutter, and you're also able to use like custom sleeves or custom cables. I'm a fan of custom cables. I need to get some here in the lab. But once you've already broken down everything, you can take out your GPU, uninstall the GPU, unplug the 8-pin CPU power pin connector, unplug the 24 power pin connector. Um, you can unplug your SATA cable. Just you want the motherboard to only have the CPU, the fan cooler, and the RAM installed on it. That's all you want installed on the motherboard when you go to drop it into the case. Speaking of the case, if you bought your case brand new, what I highly recommend you do, right? My best advice for you is to unbox and knock down KD the whole thing. Take off. Most motherboard manuals will show you how to break a case down to its bare body, like its bare chassis, and that's what I highly recommend you do. Is take everything, take every dust filter, every side panel, front, side. Most, if you're using a high-end case, you might have, say, glass, temper on one side, temper on the other, the side you can see in, temper on the front, temper on the top. You want to remove all those. Remove all those. Take those all off. Um, you can unpeel, the safety. tape or adhesive that comes on there, but you want to knock down everything. Take everything apart. Get everything laid out in front of you. It's very important. You want to build with a case that's, practically how the manufacturer rolls it off the assembly line, right? And this includes the hardware. So that's your screws. What I found, most motherboard or most cases kind of stuff their hardware box. It's like a little box. Most of them stuff that inside of the like the hard drive storage cage. There's something to look out for. I would take that out immediately. Lay out your screws. Know the right screws to use. That is super important. They are not all the same, right? You'll have different screws for to mount your fans, different screws to mount your SSD trays, and the actual to the SSDs themselves. It's really important you follow along the motherboard and don't open the screws until until the step calls for it, right? Don't open your fan screws until you get to the point where you're installing your fans. You can install your fans at any given point if you already determined your fan configuration. If I have time, that's something I'll do as well. I just go ahead and just get the fans out the way. But I really study where the fan headers are on the motherboard to reduce the cable clutter inside the case. I mean, we call it, spaghetti. They say this is spaghetti inside the case, or it's a jungle inside there. But that's one way to limit, your cord clutter. But I will sometimes install my fans first into the case just to get it out the way, um, or I'll install the motherboard to get. It really depends on you, the builder. You can kind of and you can make the determination of which one you want to do first. But when installing components, when installing components, you don't want to over tighten. This is important. This is especially important when you're when you're tightening installing your motherboard and your SSDs. Slow 180-degree turns is essentially what you want. Slow and steady 180-degree turns until you feel slight resistance. Give it a nice turn. Go on to your next one. Um, you don't want to over tighten. You really don't. I can't stress that enough. You can end up stripping the screw or ruining the thread. Um, and it's kind of difficult to overcome once you do that. And then one part of the build process when you're working in the case that I've come to notice just from and just being active in the community, and that's installing the power headers, the power pins. Normally, if somebody sends me a message or a friend of mine will text me or they'll call me and they say, "Oh, I just built my system. Help me, lab, or help me, Terrence. It's not powering on. Reset switch isn't working." Almost then they tell me it's not powering on. I'm like, "Well, did you check? Are you confident that you did everything?" Because in modern parts, unless you were just really negligent, it's kind of difficult to ruin them. Unless you're really reckless with your build process. But I mean, they're really difficult to damage. So to get nothing to work at all, the chances of saying having a bad power supply, or if you didn't test your parts out, and you might think, man, did I mess up along the way? And this is why it's good to test your parts before you build in your case, because then if you did build inside the case and you're not getting power now, you can immediately start at the last thing you did, which would be installing your headers. Thunder said, "What is your PC specs? Which computer, right? Um, the one I use the most to edit with is a Coffee Lake 6-core 12-thread CPU, so an 8700K, and it's overclocked. I mean, this CPU can do 5.1 gigahertz, high voltage, but it can do it and still be within spec. Like it'll be under 95C, say in like a Cinebench R20 or R15 run. But and it's on an Asus Maximus Hero um, Z390 motherboard. But it's about time for upgrade. Although I game at 3440 by 1440p, so it's a higher resolution than 1920 by 1080p. So my CPU isn't really as much of a factor. Kind of talked about this in the 4K video. 4K gaming video we did when we looked at the Asus 28-inch gaming monitor. You can find that video down in the description box as well. It's another watch I highly recommend you check out after the live stream. But yeah, I'm about ready for an upgrade. I'm about due for an upgrade. But if you just build and you can't get your system to power on, and you know, it's good to start with your input output pins. So that's your reset switch, your power switch. Start there. Check your motherboard. Make sure you plugged it into the right positive and negative pin. They're really small, they're really tight. It's really intimidating. I mean, if you don't have your motherboard, if you don't have some sort of reference to follow along, it's almost nigh impossible. You're shooting in the dark, really. So again, it's good to have your motherboard on hand. But if you're not getting power after you building your case, don't worry. Chances are you didn't mess anything up with. Sorry about that. Chances are you didn't mess anything up during the build process. You just messed up that part, because that part is so important. If the power and if the power positive and negative pins aren't in the right spots, the system just won't turn on, right? Your reset switch won't work. We talked about this earlier in the live stream. If you're getting a short, if your system turns on and immediately turns off, like your tune just shuts off, chances are it's shorting somewhere. So metal is making contact with, say, your motherboard, and it's just shutting itself down to protect itself from shorting out. So you want to go back and just make sure you screwed your standoffs all the way down using your hex key or your Allen key. You want to make sure you screwed your motherboard standoffs down. Make sure all your screws are fastened and there's no like thread hanging on the top. You want to make sure it's all the way down a thread. I mean, that's really important. So that's one thing you can look at if you're not getting power is your pins. Look at your motherboard pins. Make sure they're plugged into the right spots, and you'll be good to go. I mean, you'll be ready to rock and roll. Don't fret. I mean, I don't. Most people get so worried at that part when their system's not working or it's not powering on after they put it inside the case. And again, it's even more nerve-wracking if you didn't check your parts to make sure they're even working before putting them inside the case. You might really think you messed up. But once you figure that part out and you know you got it's powering on after you plugged in the power pins in the right spot, you installed your SSD, you installed your video card, you installed your fans, you installed, everything's good. Everything looks solid. You're confident. You installing your power pins should be like almost the last step, really, before you plug in the cord for the power supply unit and hit power for the first time. That's a great feeling. It's even better if you, again, didn't test your parts out. But it's a great feeling when you hit power and everything lights up and you know, like, wow, I did it. Like, I'm confident that this is going to work. Like, we're doing something. So, and if you didn't install Windows while it was in its test setup form, you can go ahead and install Windows. Just turn the system off, plug it in, check your motherboard to tell you. They'll usually tell you which USB input to use for installing Windows or installing your BIOS. So just always refer to your motherboard manual, any manual for that matter, but especially your motherboard because it is the central part. It's the most important part into your system, in my opinion. Video cards are important, sure, but I mean, your motherboard holds everything together and it just communicates everything together. So always try to have your motherboard manual on deck or handy with you. Once you've installed Windows, it's just pretty straightforward. If you have a key, you can input a key. If you don't have a key, you really don't even need one, right? You'll miss out on some of a few features, but it really won't impact your gaming. You might not be able to change things like your desktop background, I believe, among other things, but you're really not missing anything. You can click in the installation portal. You can click I don't have a key, and you may just get an annoying activate Windows watermark down at the bottom right hand corner of your screen every once in a while, but you can take care of that with going to eBay or any key site and getting a Windows 10 key, and you can do it right from a system that's already installed and activated, and you'll be good to go. I mean, you'll be it simple. I'm telling you, you can save a lot of money by getting a key that way. But once you're in Windows and Windows is installed, it takes a little bit of time. Walk through. You choose your language. Choose Cortana. Disable all of those features that may bog down Windows. Get into the platform. One of the things I highly recommend from there is update Windows. Get Windows updated immediately because you're going to get security features, better system performance, better system compatibility, all those things. So get Windows updated, get your chipset drivers updated, get your graphics updated. So update your graphics drivers, um, update Windows. I mean that's something you want to do before you test your games, before you download your benchmarks. You want to get Windows updated and current so that when you're doing your tests and your benchmarks, they are representative of a modern experience, and you won't get things like random black screens or you know unstable memory XMPs, anything to that extent. You want to make sure you update Windows, um, update graphics drivers, especially update your graphics drivers before. And then once you do that, once Windows is updated, and you kind of want to constantly check because Windows may not, they may stagger the updates. Like you may get one, then you may get another. So they may stagger updates. So it's good to double check and just look up the most current version of Windows. But you want to get Windows fully updated, get your graphics card fully updated, and then after you do that, download a few, maybe one or two benchmarks. I'd say a CPU benchmark and a graphics benchmark. You can do this by using free programs, totally free, 100% free, using free programs like Cinebench R15, Maxim's software, and even Unigen benchmarks, the Valley benchmark, and the Heaven benchmarks. Those are the Cinebench is a CPU benchmark that'll test, that'll put a strain or put a CPU render load on the CPU, and it'll make sure that your your cooler is working adequately. You're getting good temperatures. You download hardware info Z or hardware monitor to get accurate readings of your temperature and your clock speeds. Um, and it's just a good way to make sure that your CPU is functioning the way it's supposed to. And then with Unigen, which is a graphic benchmark, if you have if you're using an APU or a CPU with the graphics on the C, and which is called an APU, but even if you're using an APU, like you could still run the Unigen Valley benchmark. I ran it on the $249 um, Ryzen CPU we built again with the Ryzen 3 2200G, and at 1080p, I believe like low medium settings, it was averaging like 74 75 FPS. So that's just a free benchmark you can download, and it'll just make sure you're not getting any hiccups. You're not getting any crashes. It'll make sure that your GPU is functioning appropriately. And then another program I recommend you download is MSI Afterburner. That too is also free. So we have hardware monitor to check your temperatures. You have Cinebench R15 to do your CPU benchmarks, and then you have Unigen, Valley, or Heaven, which are GPU benchmarks, and then you have MSI Afterburner. Those four programs are all free, but they will help you check to make sure that your GPU is running right. Or with MSI Afterburner, you can change your fan speeds. You can if you're a regular viewer to the channel, you know how much we love overclocking here. We use MSI Afterburner, so even if you wanted to get, you know, your feet wet with overclocking, you can do it within MSI Afterburner. You can, test overclock in Unigen Heaven as a starting point, and then move on to maybe test some of the games you play. Um, and then speaking of, then you go ahead and download your games. Once you're not getting any weird system crashes or hiccups, go ahead and download your games, and then jump right into your experience, right? Mess around with your settings with each game to try to match your monitor's refresh rate as close as possible. If you're running let's say you're running a 1650 Super, we've covered that graphics card here recently actually with the MSI Gaming X variant. You can find that video down in the description box description box as well. Check that video out if you're here with us live after this live stream. But if you're here on the replay and you made it this far, then I highly recommend you jump down there, check that video out as well. Because if you're running a 120 hertz monitor, 1080p monitor, that graphics card at low settings is going to give you very close to that refresh rate in games like Fortnite and Rainbow Six Siege. And that video I tested was with a Ryzen 5 1600X. And now, before we unbox it, I want to say if you're just joined in and you still want to guess what's inside this before we open it up, tell me down in the comments below. I'm going to jump over here to our Twitter feed and Instagram feed here in a second to look at some of the comments we got back in the community. But if you do these things we talked about in the live stream, right? If you're here on the replay and you're watching again, but if you do these things step by step how I laid it out, you can build a system that you'll be proud of and that'll also get the job done. That will excel beyond your expectations, right? Play the games you want to play. Uh, you know, create, work on those YouTube videos, right? If you want to create content and start your streaming career, which is still very much popular. If you follow those steps, you'll build a machine you'll be confident in. You'll also be able to troubleshoot any issues that may arise down the road, or even if you want to upgrade, say, your memory to 32 gigabytes, you'll be so familiar with your system because you put every part in there. You do those things, I guarantee you can build a gaming PC too. All right, and now let's jump over to Twitter. We're here on the Twitter. And I said, guess what's inside the box. I said wrong answers only, just to have a little bit of fun. I said wrong answers only. So I'm going to unbox it during this week's YouTube Live. Share some of the funniest comments. We have my guy Damon Warren. He's not here with us today, but he did stop into one of our live streams. He said a pink teddy bear. Could be a pink teddy bear. It's maybe a small teddy bear. The i7, the Intel CPU there is for scale, but it could be a pink teddy bear, right? Like, why not? Dr. Elo, who was, believe he was here, Dr. Elo says a graphics card. As a saying, I can only imagine. Yeah, a graphics card. Wow, that'd be tiny. I mean, I have an old AMD graphics card over here that. Let me see if I can pull it back off here off the shelf. I mean that wouldn't even really be too small. I mean this is small. This is a small graphics card. It's really really old though, but believe it or not, still works and could play. Could run games like Minecraft. But graphics card. All right. Bob Lancaster said clearly it's a Velociraptor. I thought that was funny. From Jurassic, believe that was Jurassic World. He said clearly it's a Velociraptor. Yeah, sounds legit. Could be. Let's go back. Um, Sarah said another box. That'd be really interested if it's just another box, right? That'd be interesting. Like like Chinese stacking dolls, like box within a box, within a box. It's getting real Inception-y up in here. But Sarah says it's another box. The plot would really thicken if it's another box. Like me and these people would have some real explaining. Some real. We have to have some discussions. But I mean that was all. That was the guesses we got over on Twitter. Which again, if you're not following me, follow me over at Inside the Lab YT. And Dr. Elo says graphics card in the chat. Again, if you're here, if you're joining in, tell me what you think. If you're on the replay, I mean, you made it this far, you're gonna be spoiled. I mean, you could stop and guess if you want to at this point in the video, but we're jumping over to Instagram. You can follow me there too at Inside the Lab YT. I try to give a strong behind the scenes of my daily life as a content creator, just from working inside my studio, working inside my lab. But let's jump over to the post here. Let's see, we got the View. The View says Intel Threadripper. Man, I don't know why I had my hopes up when I first got it, and I was like, hey, somebody send me an Intel Threadripper. I tell you what, am I would be ecstatic. Like when I saw the View's post, I was like, man, I wish, right? And let me make sure I get this right. Hachi Man, which I believe that's Samson, not just Samson who is here with us, but another member here in the community. He said a Xeon CPU to be a good guess. The box would be a good rewrite, and I do want to do more Xeon stuff coming up. So if you're interested on how much value Intel really puts out on their CPUs, be sure to get subscribed for that. But it says a Xeon. Could be. I'd still be surprised if it is a Xeon. I really would. I mean, I'd be shocked if it's a Xeon. But I tell you what, if nobody have any guesses, let's uh let's get it let's get it open up. Let me see. Let me see. I had a blade somewhere around here. Somewhere I had a blade. We don't need one. All right. Got the sides open. I would do a drum roll. Dr. Lil says a new camera. Man, I wish. I just really started messing, like getting my feet wet with my is it 750D, and it's a great camera. But I maybe said, you know what, maybe to start the new year, I'd be in, I believe, my second year of content creation next year. I thought maybe, you know, why not prepare to say upgrade the camera game? But Dr. Elo says new camera. I don't know. Let me see. All right, let's see. I kind of got it mostly open, and I'm just gonna put it in place for you can see. Again, I'm gonna tell you. I know what it is. I don't think I've made that clear on the social media post, but I know what it is. I do want to take a moment though and shout out to Buddy, my guy Rob Balasabas sent me this awesome TubeBuddy bug uh, unbeknowingly. So that was pretty dope, and I love it. I mean, I'm a big coffee. I love drinking coffee. Like I drink coffee all the time, but they sent me that mug, which was really awesome, and I found that ironic because I said, you know what? I know what this is, and opening up here would be awesome. And also, I want to give a shout out to Creator Fundamentals Dan, who I know he's not here on the chat, but Dan sent me a Switch Pod from that I won from the People of Video conference, which was an amazing time. Although it was virtual, I met some really fun creators that not even in my niche, they're just really dope to just talk to and just watch their content. Dr. Elo being one of them here in the chat, and Andrew over at Consult a Blind Guy being another one. But shout out to Dan Courier for, I don't have it by me, but he sent me a Switch Pod and it's really cool. I can't wait to maybe walk and try it out. But all right, enough talking. Let me show you what's in the box, because you're gonna you're gonna be like, wow. Okay. Oh, hopefully you ready? You ready for it? There it goes. Look at that. Inside the lab, official hardware, or we call um, there. Well, this is part of our signature hardware, right? It says you lift me up. Like how dope is that? Like the metallic, the black and white. Like I love it. It's like reminiscent of the channel, and see there right there inside the lab. So I can drink coffee in style, but this is really dope. It looks really good. You can check out the merch, another shameless plug, but you can check out the merch. It's down in the description below. It really supports the channel directly. I'm coming up with new designs all the time. Matter of fact, I'll jump over real quick and just let's see, Teespring. I use Teespring just to see. Just bear with me. All right, let me make sure you guys. I'm sorry, can't even see it. All right, so you come here. This is our "You Lift Me Up" mug edition. Oh, let's get rid of that. All right, and it's just $9.99. I mean, all of our merch products priced really low. Dr. Lee says looks awesome. Yeah, I mean that's really dope. It's like you lift me up. I want to say you get it, but that'd be so corny. It's so obvious. I thought it was cool. I designed all of the merch myself. Take the time to do it. I tried to make it visually appealing to just everybody. Not if you just like PC games. You just could want to support Inside the Lab as a brand, right? And just look good playing, feel good gaming, right? This is one of my favorite shirts, which now that it's getting cold, I think I might have to cop this one here. It says I know I'm a handful, but that's why you got two hands. If you know me in person, oh, okay, I'm sorry, that was wrong scene. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. We was on a lot. We were back on RTX 3000. No, we're done with RTX 3000. I'm sorry, you guys couldn't see what I was looking at, but this shirt here, I want to possibly get because um, it's getting cold. And when I first launched a merch store, I did it quietly. When I first launched a merch store, I it was it was dead summertime, so I mean long sleeve was just not going to happen. But I like the hoodie variant. Again, it says I know I'm a handful, but that's why you got two hands. I was on the wrong screen in case you missed it earlier, but I mean this hoodie goes, I believe it's 30, 43, $43, and believe it or not, that's priced really competitively low. Very, very thin margin with merch on Teespring. I really just want to get you guys and girls, representing the brand, look good playing, feel good gaming, and just rep Labware, the name of our merch. As you can see, t-shirts. You have the Just Build hoodie. I like that too. InsideTheLab.net. That's a website. So yeah, I mean, just and then year one. This is the I'm wearing this shirt now, the year one shirt, and this is to commemorate my first year on YouTube as a creator. Right here, see it says year one anniversary edition. And you have that in long sleeve hoodie t-shirt. I really like that design. And here you have another signature brand, what I call the signature brands, and then any tee or any merch with say letters on it, like sayings or memes. I call out the alphabet boys. So yeah, always you can always check out the merch store. Again, I will be adding new things to it periodically. As I do, I will likely share them on social media, so I'll share them on the community tab right here on YouTube, or I'll share them, you know, um, on Twitter, on Instagram. Be on the lookout for those. Definitely more designs. I have some drawn up that I haven't shared yet, that I am working on in between, planning content and planning videos. There's so much fun things coming up to round the year out. Very close to 2,000 subscribers, and I appreciate every single one of you. I really hope every time I go to sleep, I wake up, I'm like, yep, I know it'll be. It just happens so quick. Sometimes I don't even catch it. I know I wake up and it'll be at 2K. But share the stream out, share the channel with a friend if you think these tips and strategies can help them with either building a gaming PC or maintaining their gaming PC if they're apprehensive and they just aren't comfortable with themselves yet. Send them my way. Okay, I love to help out. I love to help out. But I really like this hoodie. I don't know. It's like simple. It's like just build, right? It's like talk. Kind of what we talked about today, as far as building a gaming PC. It's like it's just build, like just build. So yeah, I mean that's the Inside the Lab official merch store. You can find that link down in the description. Again, it really supports me, really supports the channel. And if you're unsatisfied with anything, let me know. I'll do my best to compensate you or get you an exchange and get it worked out. But so far, so good. I don't know if you can kind of see here. I mean, they're all the clothes feel premium. The designs look great. Again, this is the "You Lift Me Up" mug edition. The Inside the Lab branding. It's like this shiny, highly reflective, so it's like it's really, it feels really premium, and I really like that. And I just wish there was something something inside of it for me to drink. But all right, now I think the ride is slowly coming to an end. I want to give a shout out to everybody that came out today, hung out with us. Some of you who may still be on, some of you may not be. But Dr. Elo, Ephraim, thanks for coming out and hanging out with me. Just Samson, let me see, let me go up so I make sure I don't miss anybody. Thunder, who was actually one of my kids. Thunder for hanging out. My wife, who is on the moderator status, she's lurking. She doesn't join in the chat, but she's there watching. But yeah, I mean, Thunder, Just Elo, Z Fluent came out. Had a friend I grew up with, David Gas, came out and said hello. Self Publishing with Dale came by, and that was, I mean, that was really big. And I mean, and then AKA CK3. Thanks for coming out, guys. If you're here on a replay and you made it this far, Thanks for giving this one a watch. I really do appreciate you if you've made it this far, and those of you who were here with us today live. I do appreciate you spending your time, spending this Saturday with me. I am working on, you know, trying to figure out what's the best time to do our live streams, but so far it's looking like, this is a decent time. All right? But that'll be all for this one. I hope to catch you all on the next YouTube live. So until then, be easy.